All right, and we are live. It is noon Pacific Standard Time on a Friday, and so other than last week where I was celebrating Thanksgiving here in the States, today we've got another book for me to discuss and review with you and hopefully start up a little discussion about them as well. As I queue up here, pull up the chat session for this, so it pulls on all the streams. Today we are going to be talking about Team of Teams by General Stanley McChrystal. Great book on leadership and management from the general that kind of oversaw the U.S. and Allied forces that were fighting against Al-Qaeda in Iraq. That's really the setting for this book. I know we talked about extreme ownership, and that's the Battle of Ramadi, but a lot of these military books have come out with the lessons learned from those areas. And I kind of like to talk about briefly here why it is that you see so many, say, military books on leadership. And part of the reason is that's where so much of leadership began. When you talk about large organizations, there were no organizations larger than militaries for thousands of years. And so some of the core principles in leadership have come out of those particular areas. And when the stakes are that high and you're dealing with a complicated situation like warfare, there's a lot of corollaries between that and the business environment of today. So before I dive too deeply into it, I did want to talk about next week, next Friday, noon Pacific Standard Time, I'll be talking about It's Your Ship, one of my favorite books on management and leadership. This thing is chock full of great information. So definitely next week, tune in at noontime. So again, Team of Teams, General Stanley McChrystal. We're talking about the Allied forces against Al-Qaeda in Iraq. And the issue that that you'll see run through this is that the standard model didn't work. And so they needed to come up with something new and something innovative, something that was quicker, something that was more transparent. And I think a lot of you leaders out there can see the obvious similarities between that and the current business environment where things are moving super fast. It's about quickness oftentimes in getting to a successful place in your leadership. So my book discussions, what I simply do is I go through the book and I go through a whole bunch of these little highlighted parts that I have in the book and talk about why I highlighted those and what the application is for frontline business leaders out there. So if you will humor me, and if you've read this book, I'd love to get your thoughts on some of the areas and some of the things that I highlight in here, some of the takeaways that maybe you had, and anything that I'm saying, if you want further clarification, drop down in the comment section, whether you're on YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, any of those areas, you can drop down in the comment section, and I'll go ahead and start the discussion out. So starting things out, he kind of talks about the environment that they found themselves in, where the standard model didn't work. And the takeaway from this is this was not a war of planning and discipline. It was one of agility and innovation. So in the old models of business, planning and discipline were one of the keys to overall success. But in the past environment, the world and the environments, the industries weren't changing as quickly. So those can totally work for you. And Joel, haven't read the book, you can get some of the great highlights from it here. But it's a book that's worth picking up. And I guess that'd be part of it. Overall, there were a ton of stories in this book. I would say too many stories in this book, covering kind of the points of discussion. There's some great takeaways. Don't get me wrong in this book. But I guess really where the metal meets the road or the rubber meets the road is, would I buy his next book that I think came out a couple of weeks ago? And the answer is yes. I'll probably pick that book up, and in a few months you'll catch a discussion on that one as well. Rosanna, good to see you. I'm glad you tuned in here. So we're talking about planning and discipline. That was the key. That was what set businesses apart, was the right strategy and the plan to implement that particular strategy. That was what mattered. Now it's about agility and innovation. Yes, don't get me wrong. You have to have a plan and you have to have discipline. However, that alone isn't going to help you because the environments are moving quickly. You need to be agile. So you need to build that into your models, and you need to be innovative, and you need to build that into the models as well of how you lead your teams. That's what's going to make you successful. And he'll go into how exactly to go about that. The models of organizational success that dominated the 20th century have their roots in the Industrial Revolution. So talking about why. Why was it that planning and discipline were what mattered for so long when we talk about business success? All right, those roots were in the Industrial Revolution. And simply put, the world has changed. Being effective in today's world is less a question of optimizing for the known, the relatively stable set of variables, than responsive to a constantly shifting environment. So just kind of hitting on the points of why it was that planning and discipline were what mattered for the longest amount of time. And it comes out of the Industrial Revolution, where things weren't changing dramatically, constantly, quickly, and so you could plan for knowns in the future, optimize those things, get efficiency. There's a ton of that at the turn of the century, turn of the 19th to 20th century. There's a ton of that going on. That isn't necessarily what is going to make you successful. Hey, in your industry, maybe it does. Don't get me wrong. But what you're going to need to be looking for is ways to innovate and change with the times as you get more and more information. Next comment here is, at the heart of his success was patience. So he's talking about a military commander, Admiral Nelson, who defeated the Spanish Armada. And at the heart of his success was patient, yet relentless nurturing of competence and ability within his crews. And that's one of the keys, and we'll talk more about it a little bit later on. But when we talk about agility and innovation, what that requires is a really great team of people underneath you that can move and still maintain their efficiency, that can come up with ideas. And so you have to be patient. You have to nurture. There's a whole chapter in here about gardening and gardening with your team. It takes patience. It comes over time. But if you put in the work, you can get the benefits. All right, that's one of those things. You realize you need that agility and innovation. However, there is a lot of patience and work that goes into getting yourself in a place where you can let the team go here a little bit. Jumping ahead here. Again, lots of stories in here. So some of the takeaways, there's not a crazy amount of takeaways, but there is some really good nuggets in here. Teams whose members know one another deeply perform better. So we're talking in this section here about moving from a command structure to a team structure. All right. So where you as the leader aren't intimately involved in everything that is going on, that the teams can self-monitor each other. And where that really takes place is when they know one another deeply, when they know each other better. That's the promise of team building, and finding environments and opportunities for the teams to get to know one another on a personal level better, on the professional level, what strengths, weaknesses, hobbies they have. When they know each other better, they're going to perform better and be able to maintain that team structure so that you don't have to be involved in everything that's going on. Next little section that I have in here. I really liked this particular takeaway, and I had not heard this before. In his handbook, Leading Teams, Hackman, he reminds us of Brooks' Law. Never heard of this law before. The adage that adding staff to speed up a behind-schedule project has no better chance of working than would a scheme to produce a baby quickly by assigning 9 women to be pregnant for 1 month each. Adding manpower to late software projects makes it later. All right. So a lot of the problems he's tackling, some of the things that you might be tempted to do, instead of focusing on that innovation, on that agility, instead of investing in your team, because it's hard, because it requires patience, it doesn't come quickly, is, hey, you know what? We need to be better. I'm just going to add people to the team. Good luck getting that past your chief financial officer. But even if you could, you wouldn't necessarily want to do that. If you're struggling, adding people adds complexity to a situation, and that's something that moves it behind schedule, not jumps it ahead of schedule. We didn't need every member of the task force to know everyone else. We're talking about 1,000 people that he was overseeing at this time. We just needed everyone to know someone on every team. And this is one of the big takeaways from this book for me, as far as recommendations for organizations. And that is to have one liaison person in your department go to every single department that you touch. that you interact with. And it's a way of breaking down those silos. And what happens in those situations is when your person goes to their weekly meetings, for instance, they can bring back information, they can convey information on what is going on. And that's something that brings everybody closer together. Everybody gains a better understanding of each other's work. Now, you might say, I don't have time to take somebody off the phones, off the floor for an hour every week. Baloney. Of course you do. What happens when somebody calls out sick tomorrow? Do you have a plan for dealing with that? So you have these opportunities, and this is one of those things where, yes, it takes time up front, but it saves time down the road when you prevent a neighboring department from doing something that, unbeknownst to them, is going to hurt your performance. Those are those things that get back to that. So you don't need to have, your team know everybody in every other department, but have one liaison in all of the departments that are around you that have an impact on your performance, that you impact. Have one liaison with them that gets to know those individuals, and that's what brings teams together. Great takeaway. Love that one. So what happens a lot of times, so we are inundated with information. This was another interesting takeaway from this. And I know I have been guilty of this in the past. We all have a ton of information. I've had corporate jobs where I was receiving 300, 400 emails a day, a crazy amount of information that you can't hope to keep up with. All right. Given the overwhelming amount of volume and myriad of sensitivities around information, the default is not to share. All right, especially when you're, say, in a military environment where there's top secret information. So what happens is as much information as there is that's out there, the right information isn't out there nearly as much as it should be. The problem is that the logic of need to know, those classic military terms, that's on a need to know basis. The need to know depends on the assumption that somebody, some manager or algorithm or bureaucracy actually knows who does and does not need to know which material. The issue is you don't know. When you have information, you don't necessarily know who needs to hear it. And to be completely honest, the other person doesn't often know that they need to hear this particular information. And so that's what's such a key to the dissemination of information and being wildly transparent. He was wildly transparent with the information that he had. There's a risk associated with that, but without taking that risk, he wasn't going to be able to accomplish the overall mission because his teams weren't going to be able to perform lightning quick, have that agility that he needed, that speed that he needed, and the empowerment he needed. He needed to empower them with information as well. Education requires fundamental understanding, which can be used to grasp and respond to a nearly infinite variety of threats. Training involves singular actions which are useful only against anticipated challenges. So my big takeaway for this was, training seems to be, interestingly enough, a big topic in books lately. And what I see in most organizations is you are training people for specific situations, but you aren't educating them to handle the unforeseen situations. Now, in a limited time environment, I'm all for that. 80% of your work is going to be done with 20% of the types of work that you're going to be dealing with. And so that's fine, but you need to be able to educate people on what are the priorities. What are the principles, the core values that are driving these decisions? Get into some of the why and the reasons why certain things, maybe that 20% that you do train, why these things are done the way that they are, and that educates people. So when they come up with a scenario that you don't cover in your standard operating procedures, and those happen every single day, then they know what to do without needing to come to you for it. For the information. So just one of those really nice keys that I liked in this book. Anyone who wanted to beat us, but at a game of bureaucratic politics would have all the ammunition they needed, but that wasn't the fight we were pushing. Intuitively, we knew that if we could generate enough success on the battlefield, others would want to participate. The problem was how to get their participation up front. And so he is talking about a daily call that he had, a daily conference call, and there would be people from around the world, hundreds of people on this, and they would be sharing a ton of information. That's what it means. If somebody wanted to play bureaucratic politics, they had all kinds of information if they were on this particular call. But this was the way for them to inform everybody on what they were doing and where the successes came in. When they had the successes, they knew that people would be more interested in playing ball with them, in supporting them. And that's so much of what goes on with initiatives, change initiatives, new projects that you have that are coming out. You can see the benefit, but others can't. And it isn't until they see that success that they want to be a part of it. And everybody wants to, piggyback, get on the bandwagon when something is rolling. So the trick is how do you get people to be supportive before the success actually starts taking place? One of those ways is that radical transparency, where you're informing them more information than they need to know to tie things together a little bit. And so what happened was as this started rolling out, our process began to develop its own gravitational pull as more and more groups recognized what the speed and transparency we had put in place could offer. All of a sudden, when people start understanding what it is that you are doing, with your project, with your change initiatives, when they start understanding that, they'll start being able to see their benefits, the benefits that they could get out of whatever it is that you're doing, or your help in particular situations. And so you're driving that transparency and that information to try to foster that understanding. Once you have that understanding, then it creates kind of a flywheel effect where it feeds off itself, and you get more and more participation, more and more support, which gets more and more success. Next is getting back to and jumping around just a little bit when we talked about having a liaison person in another department or with another department so that they could see what was going on. I really like this takeaway. If it doesn't pain you to give the person up, then pick someone else. What happens, and I've seen this happen, is that what you do is you don't take your superstars out of your department. You keep their performance and you send somebody else to another department to be that liaison person. No, you wanted the opposite effect. If it doesn't pain you to let that person go, if it doesn't hurt to see them disappear for an hour in a busy morning while they go, sit in on a weekly meeting with another department, if it doesn't pain you, then you need to pick somebody else. You need to send your best. That's one of the keys to this in getting the sort of give and take, getting the sort of information sharing going on is having that. I don't know why I actually highlighted that particular part there. Collective intelligence, next comment, is collective intelligence of groups and communities has little to do with the intelligence of their individual members and much more to do with the connections between them. It is the idea flow within a community that builds the intelligence that makes it successful. So a deep concept in this particular statement here. But what he was really looking for was deep connections between people, and then the ideas to start flowing and working through. And what happens is when you have better understanding and when you have better connections between people, then ideas start bubbling to the surface, the right ideas at least, and then people start stacking on those ideas. So I might have a course of action that wants to, that makes sense to go forward, but when I share it with multiple people, they can go ahead and stack on their own ideas on how to make it even better. And so great ideas don't necessarily come from singular individuals. Oftentimes they will come from great networks of people. That's why brainstorming sessions are so important, is because you get those that idea flow going and you're going to get something out of that. It was just an interesting concept that they kind of dove into a little bit. So getting into how he managed this meeting. So we've started empowering individuals. All right, we've been transparent with information, which builds their understanding, and now we're empowering them to take action on that understanding. My response, often very publicly conveyed during our daily meetings typically endorsed their initiative and created a multiplier effect whereby more and more people seeing the success of their peers would begin taking more matters into their own hands. So this gets into the concept of rewarding what you want to see more of. So when you have somebody that takes initiative, if you're trying to work on people taking initiative, taking ownership, when you see it, praise it right there in the moment as publicly as possible. And what happens is people see you doing that, and then they want some of that for themselves. They see that it's okay. Where this comes in even almost better than that is when they take the initiative and it fails. Then you can go back to them and say, hey, it didn't work, but I love the fact that you took the initiative on it. That's hugely important. Now, we learned that we want to do this and this and this, but taking that initiative was the most important part. Now, all of a sudden, you've taught people by celebrating that success or even celebrating that failure, you've taught people that it's okay to take initiative and it's okay to fail, which means it's even better for them they're even more likely to take some of that initiative. We found that even as speed increased, so things start moving faster, he's conveying more information, which gains understanding. He's empowering his team to take initiative. We found that even as speed increased, that increases the speed of the operation, and we pushed authority further down, the quality of the decisions actually went up. Now, this is a tough one for most leaders to really internalize. It is that you don't necessarily make the best decisions in every single situation because you don't. The further you get from the information, the further you get from the customer, the less information, the less understanding you have. The person that is best equipped to make the right decision in regards to a customer is the person that is in front of the customer at that moment. And what he found in this as he went through this whole initiative is that the more they pushed the decision-making process down to the front lines, the better quality the decisions were, the higher success rate they had on certain aspects of what they were doing. Hugely important. But with that said, broad authority could have gone terribly wrong if we had not spent. This is getting back to the General Nelson who defeated the Spanish Armada, I think. Is that broad authority that he gave each of his ship commanders could have gone terribly wrong if he had not spent decades cultivating their individual quality as decision makers. It isn't. All right, this is not a quick and easy formula that he's talking about. Hey, be more transparent and share more information. When that happens, they're going to get more understanding, and then you can empower them to make decisions. They're going to make better decisions. No, you do have to convey the right information. You have to give them the training, the background, follow-up discussion so that they have all of the frame of references that they need. You need to invest time and energy in your team if you want them to be more agile. In this particular case. The truth is that simply taking off constraints is a dangerous move. It should be done only if the recipients of newfound authority have the necessary sense of perspective to act on it wisely. All right, so it isn't just about, hey, let's take off the constraints and watch the good decisions flow. No, that's not the case. What's going to happen is you're going to torpedo your operation if you haven't given them that follow-up training, that follow-up perspective, the understanding of why these decisions take place. That's such a key. Oh, yes. I told subordinates that if they provided me with sufficient clear information about their operations, I would be content to watch from a distance. They were free to make all of the decisions they wanted as long as they provided the visibility that under shared consciousness had become the standard. So your team can make all kinds of decisions, but there needs to be a mechanism in place that provides transparency into the decision for you. He called this eyes on, hands off. And it's a great place if you can get there as a leader because it gives you the time to work on larger things, strategy things, but your eyes are on the operation, so you are up to date on everything that is going on. But that requires that the team convey to you all the information that you need to understand the situation and the decisions that they are making. When they do that, it's easy to kind of step back and step away just a little bit. At first, he's just talking personally, and I think everybody can kind of relate to this in their leadership roles. At first, it felt awkward to delegate decisions to subordinates that were technically possible for me to make myself. That's why a lot of people don't delegate, is because, well, I have the ability to. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and give you the answer to the question. They don't spend the extra 30 seconds to reflect that, mirror that question back to the person asking it to build their understanding, to build their empowerment. All right. I found that only the senior leader could drive the operations rhythm, transparency, and cross-functional cooperation we needed. I kept the task force focused on clearly articulated priorities by explicitly talking about them. Your role as a leader is to monitor that operational tempo, how quickly things are doing, how quickly people are doing things, where the productivity stands, where the improvements are coming from, where the problems are coming from. But the other thing that you want to do is you want to be able to convey the priorities of the operation. And you convey that best by talking about it. What you talk about is what people will deem as important. And so it isn't the reason why core values don't get driven deeply into operations is that people aren't talking about them all the time. And not for nothing, but an easy way is just simply when you give directives, when you give advice, tie that directive, tie that advice on how it fits into a core value. That's an easy way of doing that. But if you talk about priorities, the more you talk about your priorities, the more people will recognize them and the more they'll be able to take actions that reflect those priorities. I found, however, that asking seemingly stupid questions or admitting openly, I don't know, was accepted, even appreciated. Asking for opinions and advice showed respect. This is huge. 3 of the most important words that a leader can say to their team is, I don't know. Because your team doesn't know the answer to every question. So now all of a sudden it becomes okay to not know. And when you are okay with that, then you can actually seek the information. It's not okay to remain ignorant, but one of the reasons that people remain ignorant is they're afraid to admit they don't know something. So if that fear is taken away, then they are free to ask the question, which can immediately get them some knowledge. Now you're afraid that your ego is going to take a hit on that, but it actually is the opposite. People will respect you more. People will accept your feedback more if you admit situations where you don't know and where you ask for clarification. People really, because everybody knows how difficult that is to say, it actually is a reflection on the importance of the individual to you when you feel free to say those things. All right, getting to the last comments here. I really liked this question. So it's a military perspective, and I'll spin it to a business perspective. He asked the question, if I told you, he asked this question to a soldier, if I told you that you weren't going home until we win, what would you do differently? And I really like that question. And maybe you flip it into a business perspective of, what if I told you that you weren't going to get paid until we met our revenue targets? What would you do differently? All right, just an exercise, asking the right question to get an interesting answer from people. I really like that, kind of putting that dramatic situation on people to unlock some of their creativity, and actually in this case getting the information, the transparent information that nobody, the bad news that nobody wants to tell the boss. All right, this question helps break that down so that you can give the boss the bad news. And if you're the boss, then that's more information that you have to work with. You have the right to judge in person the leader who represents you, and I have the right to size you up as well. There's always this is getting at a reciprocal relationship between employee and leader. So one of the concerns is the leader is always assessing, measuring people and seeing how well they measure up to certain standards. Well, there's a flip side to that, and that is that the employees have every right to ask whether the leader measures up and to hold them accountable for that and to talk about that and have that judgment. We don't like to be judged. But you know what? As leaders, we are judging other individuals. We are judging our employees. They have that right as well. That kind of opens it up, just kind of a sidebar conversation. So, Team of Teams. Again, excellent book, a little long-winded, tons of stories in here. And I say too many stories, but I will pick up his next book, so there had to be something in it, but some good messaging there in the new environment where everything is constantly changing here in the information age. All right, it isn't enough to simply have a plan and have the discipline to carry it out. You need agility and innovation as well. And so you need a plan, don't get me wrong, and you need the discipline to carry it out, but you also need the discipline to change and adjust to things as they come along, to have the innovation to solve new problems, to go in different directions. It isn't that you set the plan right away and just follow it. It's that you set the plan, follow it, and look around for where you need to make adjustments as you move along. Now, the way to get that agility is to really super empower your teams. All right, to really get the most out of your employees. And as a leader, that's your role, is to get the most out of your team for the benefit of the organization. How you do that, and General Stanley McChrystal did this with a huge group of Special Forces officers, over 1,000 people, is pushed the information down, was very transparent with the information. What happened with that information when people started receiving that? And so you can do this in business. What's going on with the organization? Where is it succeeding? Where has it got problems? Where is it going? What plans are in place? All of those things, feed that information to your team. What happens is they get a better understanding of what is going on in other teams. You can foster that by having liaisons in different departments that can feed your information to that department and can gather information about what's going on, so you have a better perspective on things. Once you get that understanding, then you can start empowering people to make decisions themselves. They've now got the information. They now have the perspective and the understanding. So you push the decisions down the chain of command, all right, in the organization. Now, there's a huge amount of benefits that come out of it that are kind of surprising. The decisions generally get better, and the operational tempo moves much, much quicker. All right, then you keep monitoring that. That's really the nuts and bolts of this. Again, great message on here. I liked the book a lot, and I hope you pick it up. In the meantime, that was Team of Teams. Next week, we keep on the military kick here. One of my favorite books. There is just a ton of great leadership and management information in here that you can put in almost any organization on the planet. So tune in next week, noon Pacific Standard Time. It's your ship, and I'll be talking about that. So in the meantime, if you have any questions at all about business, leadership, management, any problems, obstacles you're facing, always feel free to reach out to me. cm@CameronMorrissey.com. You can direct message me on any of these social media channels that you're viewing. In the meantime, I will see you all next week. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.